A line of red dirt corrugated track cuts through spinifex, past a rusted iron fence and a galvanized iron surveyor's peg driven into dry clay. Nothing moves except the heat shimmer off the salt flat and a wedge-tailed eagle turning over a stanza of mulga. It looks like 300,000 square kilometres of empty pastoral country. It is not. This quiet expanse conceals a continent-scale lattice of sealed military vaults, subterranean fires that have burned since antiquity, and radioactive impact craters written off as ordinary salt lakes. What is remarkable is not that these hidden geometries exist, but that millions of people drive past their outer fences every year without ever suspecting what lies beneath the surface. How did an entire continent leave its most volatile engineering failures, sacred boundary lines, and high-security zones invisible in plain sight? Ahead on this list, we will look at a deep granite bunker housing weapons systems that officially do not exist, and an ancient inland sea where an entire river system vanished into underground caverns. But we begin at the edge of the desert, where a boomtown simply froze in time. Number 25. Gwalia Ghost Town, Western Australia. In the red dust of the northern goldfields, 830 kilometres northeast of Perth, stands a town where time stopped on a single afternoon in December 1963. At Gwalia, timber cottages with iron roofs sit preserved on the edge of a massive open pit, their timber verandas drooping into the scrub. When the Sons of Gwalia gold mine shut down its pumps without warning, 500 workers walked away from their homes in a single shift. They left kitchen tables set with tins of tea, 1960s newspapers open on bed frames, and tools resting against workshop walls. Unlike standard ruins that decay into timber scrap, Gwalia was claimed by the dry inland air and strict heritage conservation laws that locked the entire settlement behind perimeter restrictions. Today, the Shire of Leonora maintains the town under a policy of arrested decay. Visitors can walk the outer lanes, but the interiors of the cottages remain strictly off-limits, sealed behind glass and monitored by security systems. The surrounding land is a patchwork of active mining leases and unstable shafts, where unauthorised entry carries heavy fines under Western Australian mining legislation. The deep shaft beneath the town once reached over 1,000 metres into the Archean crust, making it one of the deepest underground workings in the Southern Hemisphere. Today, those lower drives are drowned in black groundwater, guarding a subterranean complex that sits silent beneath the iron roofs. Number 24. The Captain's Flat Mining District, New South Wales. 50 kilometres south of Canberra, along the upper reaches of the Molonglo River, lies a valley that holds one of the most persistent environmental legacies in southeastern Australia. From 1882 until 1962, the mines at Captain's Flat extracted millions of tonnes of lead, zinc, copper and pyrites from deep volcanic massive sulfide deposits. When the Lake George Mines Company ceased operations, it left behind over 2 million tonnes of unstable tailings perched on the steep hillsides directly above the river headwaters. In 1939 and again in 1942, containment dams collapsed, sending thousands of tonnes of acidic heavy metal sludge surging down the Molonglo River toward what would later become Lake Burley-Griffin. The water turned a pale, toxic turquoise, wiping out all aquatic life for 30 kilometres downstream. Millions of dollars in state and federal funding have been poured into capping the waste dumps with concrete, clay and sealants, yet acid mine drainage continues to seep from the old adits. Today, the core mine site remains a high-risk prohibited zone managed by the New South Wales Department of Planning and Environment. High-density fencing, warning signage, and continuous water quality monitoring stations block entry to the collapsing shafts. The site stands as a stark warning. Beneath the serene rural landscape of the southern tablelands lies an industrial wound that requires perpetual engineering to prevent it from poisoning the national capital's water system. Number 23. The Woomera Prohibited Area, South Australia. Stretching across 122,000 square kilometres of the South Australian Outback, an area larger than North Korea, lies the Woomera Prohibited Area. Established in 1947 under a joint defence agreement between Australia and the United Kingdom, this vast expanse of red plain and gibber tablelands became the world's largest land-based weapons testing range. Hundreds of rockets, experimental missiles and atmospheric atomic devices were detonated across its red clay pans during the Cold War. The ground is still scattered with unexploded ordnance, debris from satellite launch vehicles, and radioactive hotspots from early nuclear tests at Giles and Emu Field. The Australian Department of Defence maintains strict control over the boundary, which is divided into distinct security zones. While the Stuart Highway cuts through the eastern edge, leaving the main road means crossing an invisible legal line enforced by federal police and military patrols under the Defence Force Protection Act. Unauthorised entry carries penalties including immediate arrest and lengthy prison terms. Even pastoralists who lease stations within the buffer zones must evacuate their properties during scheduled testing windows. Mapping apps show empty desert, but satellite imagery reveals launch pads, radar installations, and deep subterranean bunkers cut directly into the ancient bedrock. Number 22. Mount Brockman and the Ranger Uranium Exclusions, Northern Territory. In the heart of Kakadu National Park, rising dramatically above the Magella Creek floodplain, stands Jidbi, also known as Mount Brockman. To the Mirarr traditional owners, this sandstone massif is a sacred place of profound cultural importance, housing sacred sites and ancestral spirits that must not be disturbed. Directly beneath the shadow of this mountain lies the former Ranger uranium mine and the undeveloped Jabiluka ore body, containing some of the richest high-grade uranium deposits on Earth. For over 40 years, the site was the epicenter of a bitter struggle between mining corporations, federal authorities, and First Nations guardians. While the Ranger mine produced over 100,000 tons of uranium oxide before shutting down in 2021, the surrounding country remains a highly restricted industrial and cultural zone. The area is enclosed by high-security perimeter fencing, guarded by security patrols, and subject to strict radiation monitoring protocols enforced by the Commonwealth Supervising Scientist. Millions of tons of radioactive tailings sit buried in the former open cut, requiring a complex, multi-billion-dollar rehabilitation process expected to take decades. The Mirarr people have consistently refused consent to mine the adjacent Jabiluka deposit, successfully securing a permanent veto that keeps the ore sealed in the earth. Mount Brockman stands silent above the fenced exclusion zone, a holy mountain watching over an industrial wasteland undergoing a long, painstaking return to country. Number 21. Rum Jungle Rehabilitation Zone, Northern Territory. 100 kilometres south of Darwin, tucked into the tropical woodland of the Finnis River catchment, lies Rum Jungle, the site that birthed Australia's atomic age and left behind one of its worst ecological disasters. Discovered in 1949 by a local prospector, Rum Jungle supplied uranium to the United States and the United Kingdom for their nuclear weapons programs throughout the 1950s and 1960s. When the Commonwealth government walked away from the site in 1971, it left behind open pits filled with acidic water and millions of tons of pyritic tailings. Monsoonal rains washed heavy metals and sulfuric acid straight into the east branch of the Finnis River, turning the waterway into a biological dead zone for over 15 kilometres. For decades, local First Nations groups, the Kungarakan and Warai peoples, fought for the cleanup of their ancestral land. Initial government remediation efforts in the 1980s failed to stop the acid drainage, requiring a fresh, multi-million-dollar federal rehabilitation program initiated in recent years. Today, the site is a strictly controlled government reserve, closed to the public and monitored by automatic sensors, security gates, and environmental scientists. Warning signs posted along the boundary fences alert travellers to radiation hazards and contaminated groundwater. Rum Jungle remains a stark, fenced-off monument to an era when strategic military demand overrode environmental science and First Nations sovereignty. Number 20. The Wittenoom Degazetted Asbestos Exclusion Zone, Western Australia. In the Pilbara region, 1,100 kilometres north of Perth, sits a 14,000-hectare area erased from official state maps. Wittenoom was once a bustling mining town of over 20,000 residents during its peak operation between 1943 and 1966, established to extract blue asbestos from the sheer walls of Wittenoom Gorge. Colonial surveyors and CSR subsidiary Australian Blue Asbestos misread the friable amphibole mineral as a limitless industrial asset, ignoring the microscopic lethal potential of crucidolite fibres. Millions of tons of asbestos tailings were spread across school grounds, roads, and public parks to settle dust. By 1978, the Western Australian government realised the airborne dust had contaminated the entire catchment, making it the largest contaminated site in the Southern Hemisphere. In 2007, the state officially degazetted the town site, cutting power, water, and road maintenance. Under the Wittenoom Closure Act 2022, the State Parliament granted powers to compulsorily acquire remaining private properties and demolish all standing structures. Today, signs posted by the Department of Planning, Lands and Heritage warn visitors that breathing a single fibre of dust carries a fatal risk of mesothelioma. The road sign was taken down, the postcode was revoked, and the land was returned to a legal non-entity. Yet, 3 billion years of Precambrian banded iron formation continue to bleed deadly fibres into the creek beds every time monsoonal rains wash through the gorge. Number 19. The Maralinga Prohibited Area, South Australia. 300 kilometres north of the Great Australian Bight, on the edge of the treeless Nullarbor Plain, lies 3,000 square kilometres of scrubland where the British military conducted 9 major atmospheric nuclear tests between 1956 and 1957. Known as Operation Buffalo and Operation Antler, these detonations turned hundreds of hectares of limestone tableland into radioactive glass. But the worst contamination came from the minor trials, specifically Operation Vixen B in 1963, which blew apart plutonium cores using conventional high explosives to simulate accident scenarios. This distributed 22 kilograms of toxic, long-lived plutonium-239 in fine particulate plumes across Maralinga country. For decades, the Oak Valley and Maralinga Aboriginal communities were displaced from their traditional hunting grounds, while survey parties logged background radiation levels that far exceeded international safety thresholds. A multi-million-dollar remediation program completed by the Commonwealth in 2000 involved burying thousands of tons of contaminated soil and debris inside deep, vitrified concrete pits. In 2014, title to the land was officially returned to the Maralinga Jarraja traditional owners. However, large sections of the boundary, particularly the ground zero sites at Taranaki and Breakaway, remain restricted buffer zones subject to ongoing radiochemical monitoring by the Australian Radiation Protection and Nuclear Safety Agency. The land looks like ordinary saltbush, but 300 metres down, concrete caps seal away materials that will remain toxic for 24,000 years. Number 18. The Yarrabubba Impact Structure, Western Australia. On a pastoral station 70 kilometres north of Sandstone, an ordinary expanse of weathered granite hides the oldest recorded meteorite crater on Earth. For decades, geological maps labelled the Yarrabubba outcrop as part of the ancient Gawler Craton, a stable block of continental crust that has survived for over 2.5 billion years. It was not until 2020 that geochronologists from Curtin University and NASA dated microscopic zircon crystals from the structure, proving the impact occurred precisely 2.229 billion years ago. A space rock upwards of 7 kilometres wide slammed into a massive continental ice sheet, vaporizing over 200 billion tons of ice and blasting a crater 70 kilometres across. The intense heat of the shockwave recrystallized the surrounding granites, creating microstructures that can only be identified through electron microscopy. There is no dramatic rim left to see. Over 2 billion years of relentless wind and rain have planed the landscape perfectly flat, erasing all surface topography. Today, the core of the structure sits under private pastoral leases and mining tenements, accessible only via unsealed station tracks with explicit owner permission. Geoscience Australia monitors the site as a key reference point for early planetary evolution, proving that a catastrophic event capable of altering Earth's global climate can hide completely flat under a layer of red ironstone gravel. Number 17. The Jabiluka Mineral Lease Exclusion, Northern Territory. Enclosed entirely within the boundaries of Kakadu National Park, the Jabiluka lease covers 22 square kilometres of Arnhem Land escarpment country. In 1971, drilling teams identified an extraordinary uranium deposit containing over 130,000 tons of high-grade ore buried beneath sandstone caprock. The discovery triggered immediate commercial pressure to construct a massive underground mine. However, the deposit sits directly adjacent to Mara sacred sites, including Boyweg and Almudge, places associated with powerful creation ancestral beings in First Nations cosmology. Following decades of international protests, blockades and legal challenges, the Mara traditional owners secured an agreement in 2005 that no mining could occur without their explicit consent. In 2024, the Northern Territory and Commonwealth governments formally declined to renew the mineral lease, allowing the area to be incorporated into the surrounding World Heritage Area. Access to the lease remains tightly restricted under national park regulations and Aboriginal land rights legislation, with high-voltage perimeter fences and automated surveillance monitoring the former exploration shafts. The underlying geological structure remains one of the densest concentrations of energy minerals in the world, yet it sits untouched beneath a forest of stringy bark and bloodwood, a silent testament to a 50-year legal boundary drawn across raw rock. Number 16. The Mount Wingen Underground Coal Seam, New South Wales. 220 kilometres north of Sydney, near the town of Burning Mountain, a subterranean fire has been burning through a thick coal seam at a depth of 30 metres for over 6,000 years. Early European settlers who observed smoke rising from fissures in the sandstone in 1828 assumed Mount Wingen was an active volcano, the only one on the Australian continent. It was not until 1829 that geologist Reverend William Branwhite Clark correctly identified the heat source as an underground fire consuming the Permian-era Greta coal measures. The fire moves south at a rate of approximately 1 metre per year, heating the ground above it to over 350 degrees Celsius and causing the sandstone caprock to collapse into fractured, sterile trenches. The intense thermal stress has baked the surrounding shale into bright red porcelain stone, completely sterilizing the topsoil and preventing vegetation growth along the fire's advancing front. The National Parks and Wildlife Service manages the site as a strict reserve, restricting visitor access to a single elevated timber boardwalk to prevent tourists from falling into hidden, superheated sinkholes. Scientists estimate the fire has consumed over 18 kilometers of coal since it ignited via spontaneous combustion or an ancient lightning strike, making it the oldest continuously burning coal seam on the planet. Number 15. The Commonwealth Deep Sea Reserve Network, offshore Australia. Stretching across 8 million square kilometres of ocean, a maritime area far larger than the Australian landmass itself, lies the abyssal plain of the Australian Exclusive Economic Zone. While coastal waters are thoroughly charted, over 75% of the deep sea floor below 2,000 metres remains completely unmapped by high-resolution multibeam sonar. In 2017, researchers aboard the CSIRO research vessel Investigator mapped a series of submerged volcanic peak chains off the coast of Tasmania, discovering massive underwater canyons 5 kilometres deep and cold water coral reefs that had never been documented by science. These deep ocean trenches house unique benthic ecosystems isolated for tens of millions of years, adapted to extreme pressure and zero sunlight. Under the Environment Protection and Biodiversity Conservation Act, 1999, vast swathes of these offshore zones have been designated as marine parks, placing strict prohibitions on commercial bottom trawling, oil and gas exploration, and deep-sea mining. These areas are completely inaccessible to the public, monitored remotely by satellite tracking systems and naval patrols that log vessel movements across thousands of nautical miles. The deep ocean floor remains the ultimate blank space on the national map, an underwater terrain of mountains higher than the Australian Alps, sitting sealed beneath a mile of ocean water. But what happens when the hidden geology of a place is not buried under ocean water or ironstone, but locked behind a century of secret land transfers? Number 14. The Acraman Impact Structure, South Australia. In the Gawler Ranges of South Australia, 430 kilometres northwest of Adelaide, sits Lake Acraman, a dry, circular salt pan 20 kilometres across that looks like dozens of other playa lakes in the arid interior. For more than a century, pastoralists and state surveyors mapped it as a simple topographic depression formed by wind erosion and regional faulting. The breakthrough came in 1986, when geologist George Williams from the University of Adelaide was examining rock samples collected hundreds of kilometres to the east in the Flinders Ranges. Within a layer of 590-million-year-old Ediacaran shale, he identified shatter cones and shocked quartz crystals, microscopic shock structures that only form under extreme pressures exceeding 10 gigapascals. Trace chemical analysis revealed anomalous iridium concentrations, a classic signature of extraterrestrial impacts. By cross-referencing regional aeromagnetic and gravity survey data compiled by the Department of Mines and Energy, Williams traced the impact ejector back to Lake Acraman. Seismic reflection profiles and satellite imagery subsequently confirmed the presence of a deeply eroded, 90-kilometre-wide impact structure formed when a 4-kilometre-wide asteroid struck the Gawler Craton at 20 kilometres per second. The force of the impact vaporized kilometers of ancient volcanic rock, blasting debris over 300 kilometers across the inland sea that then covered South Australia. Today, the central ring is protected within the Lake Acraman Structure Reserve, where access is strictly managed and pastoral leases cover the outer rim. The surface displays no dramatic crater walls, but geochronological dating proves that beneath the salt crust sits the shattered root of one of the largest impact events in Australian geological history. Number 13. The Olympic Dam ore body, South Australia. 560 kilometres north of Adelaide, under 350 metres of featureless, barren sedimentary cover, lies the world's largest known single deposit of uranium and the fourth largest deposit of copper. In 1975, exploration geologists working for Western Mining Corporation had no surface outcrops, no mineralized soil, and no historic workings to guide them across the Stuart Shelf. Their target was based purely on a theoretical model developed by geologist Douglas Haynes, who analyzed regional gravity anomalies and aeromagnetic surveys to predict where deep mantle-derived fluids might have deposited metals within Mesoproterozoic breccias. In July 1975, the company drilled core hole RD1 into a weak regional gravity high. At a depth of 353 meters, the diamond drill hit hematite-rich breccia, yielding high concentrations of copper, uranium, gold, and rare earth elements. Subsequent diamond drilling defined a massive iron oxide copper-gold deposit containing over 10 billion tons of ore formed 1.59 billion years ago. Today, the site is operated by BHP as a massive open-cut and underground mining complex, completely surrounded by high-security fencing, remote access gates, and federal radiological monitoring regimes under Commonwealth nuclear safeguards. The discovery altered global economic geology. It proved that world-class mineral deposits could be identified through hundreds of meters of solid caprock using geophysical modeling alone, long before a single drill bit broke the surface. Number 12. The Bungle Range, Western Australia. In the East Kimberley, 300 kilometres south of Wyndham, 30,000 hectares of orange and dark grey striped sandstone towers rise up to 250 metres above the savanna plain. For over 40,000 years, the Kidja traditional owners knew this massif as Purnululu, maintaining traditional pathways and managing the surrounding country. Yet on official state survey maps and national topographic charts, the range was designated as unnamed rugged terrain, ignored by pastoralists because the fragile sandstone could not support cattle. The official record changed abruptly in 1983 when a film crew shooting a documentary on Western Australia flew over the area and captured high-definition aerial footage of the beehive-shaped domes. Geological mapping led by the Geological Survey of Western Australia subsequently revealed that the towers were composed of Devonian period quartz sandstone deposited 375 million years ago. Airborne laser scanning, LiDAR, and petrographic analysis explained the distinct banding. Dark grey bands are formed by cyanobacteria growing on permeable layers where moisture collects, while orange bands are coated in iron oxide protective crusts where the rock dries rapidly. In 1987, the area was declared Purnululu National Park, and in 2003, it gained UNESCO World Heritage status. Strict park management regulations prohibit climbing the fragile sandstone structures, protecting a landscape that was fully understood by traditional owners for millennia, but remained invisible to the state survey until an airborne camera passed overhead. Number 11. The Budj Bim Aquaculture Complex, Victoria. In the basalt plains of southwest Victoria, near Lake Condah, lies an intricate engineering system built long before the Egyptian pyramids. For decades, European settlers viewed the stony lava flows of the Mount Eccles eruption as marginal grazing land suited only for sheep. That perception was dismantled through archaeological mapping and radiometric dating led by Gunditjmara traditional owners, alongside researchers from Monash University and Melbourne University. Utilizing high-resolution LiDAR, aerial photograph interpretation, and carbon-14 dating of charcoal trapped within stone structures, researchers mapped a vast 6,000-year-old hydraulic engineering network covering thousands of hectares. The Gunditjmara had modified the channels of the 30,000-year-old Budj Bim basalt flow, constructing stone weirs, holding ponds, and sluice gates out of vesicular basalt blocks to trap, grow, and harvest short-finned eels, Anguilla australis. Excavations revealed stone channel networks extending across several square kilometers, proving the existence of a settled, sophisticated aquaculture economy. In 2019, the Budj Bim cultural landscape was inscribed on the World Heritage List solely for its cultural value, the first site in Australia nominated without natural heritage criteria. Large portions of the complex are managed as protected Indigenous protected areas, where access is strictly controlled by the Gunditjmering Traditional Owners Aboriginal Corporation to safeguard the stone infrastructure. The site permanently disproved colonial Australians that First Nations Australians were strictly nomadic hunter-gatherers, proving that advanced civil engineering was built directly into the basalt of Victoria thousands of years ago. Number 10. The Sahul Continental Shelf Submerged Landscape, Western Australia and Northern Territory. Stretching beneath the Timor and Arafura Seas, off the northern coast of Australia, lies a drowned landmass that once covered more than 2 million square kilometres. During the last glacial maximum, 20,000 years ago, sea levels were up to 130 metres lower than today, joining mainland Australia, New Guinea and Tasmania into the continent of Sahul. The official recognition of human occupation across this submerged shelf came through high-resolution multibeam bathymetry, sub-bottom seismic profiling, and marine archaeological diving, led by researchers from Flinders University and the Australian Institute of Marine Science. In 2020, offshore surveys in the Dampier Archipelago identified submerged stone tools, hearths, and quarry sites located up to 14 metres underwater off the Pilbara coast, the first confirmed underwater First Nations archaeological sites in Australia. Radiocarbon dating of shell deposits and acoustic profiling of submerged river channels confirmed that expansive freshwater lakes and river networks once supported hundreds of thousands of people across the Sahul Shelf before rapid post-glacial sea level rise inundated the coast between 14,000 and 7,000 years ago. This physical mapping directly validated Aboriginal oral histories documented along the Kimberley and Arnhem Land coasts, which recount ancient shorelines, flooded valleys, and island formations with precise geographical detail. Today, these submerged cultural landscapes fall under Commonwealth Marine Park protections, monitored by seabed mapping vessels to prevent damage from industrial dredging and subsea cabling. Number 9. The Jack Hills Zircon Deposit, Western Australia. 800 kilometres north of Perth, in the dry scrub of the Murchison region, lies a low ridge of metamorphosed conglomerate rock known as the Jack Hills. To the naked eye, the quartzites look identical to thousands of other ancient outcrops across the Gawler Craton. In 1986, geologists using the Sensitive High-Resolution Ion Microprobe (SHRIMP) at the Australian National University in Canberra began analysing microscopic zircon crystals extracted from the rock matrix. By measuring the isotopic decay rates of uranium into lead within individual zircon grains, measuring less than 1/10 of a millimetre across, scientists identified grains dated to 4.404 billion years old. This discovery pushed back the confirmed age of Earth's solid crust and liquid water oceans to within 150 million years of the planet's formation. Isotopic analysis of oxygen within the zircons proved that liquid water existed on the surface far earlier than previously thought possible, fundamentally altering global models of early planetary evolution. The site sits on private pastoral leases and mining tenements where access is tightly regulated by the Western Australian Department of Energy, Mines, Industry Regulation and Safety to prevent unauthorised sampling. The Jack Hills zircons represent the oldest known physical fragments of the Earth ever identified, extracted from a ridge of plain rock that sat unnoticed under the Outback sun until mass spectrometers isolated the lead isotopes within a speck of dust. But what happens when the hidden boundary is not a speck of dust in a mass spectrometer, but an entire invisible military jurisdiction slicing through the desert? Number 8. The submerged Lake Yucumbene and Old Adaminaby, New South Wales. High in the Snowy Mountains, 90 kilometres at west of Cooma, lies Lake Yucumbene, an artificial reservoir holding 4 million megalitres of water, roughly 8 times the volume of Sydney Harbour. Created between 1956 and 1958 as part of the Snowy Mountains hydroelectric scheme, the dam flooded the Yucumbene River Valley, submerging the historic township of Adaminaby under 30 metres of water. Over 500 residents were relocated to a new town site 6 kilometres away, leaving behind stone foundations, timber fences, brick chimneys, and an entire 19th century street grid. For decades, the flooded township existed only on historical cadastral maps preserved by the National Library of Australia. However, during extended drought cycles, most notably the Millennium Drought between 2002 and 2007, when reservoir levels dropped below 10% capacity, the drowning reversed. The stone foundations of the commercial district, rusted farming equipment, and intact concrete bridge abutments re-emerged from the mudflats. Today, Snowy Hydro and the New South Wales Department of Planning and Environment closely manage access to these exposed ruins during low water events. Warning signs and fisheries patrols enforce strict protections under the Heritage Act 1977, prohibiting the removal of any artefacts. The drowned town stands as a physical reminder of engineered displacement, an entire community submerged to power the eastern seaboard's electrical grid, reappearing whenever the mountain snowpack fails to fill the reservoir. Number 7. The Broken Hill Line of Load Exclusion Zone, New South Wales. In the far west of New South Wales, 1,100 kilometres from Sydney, sits Broken Hill, a boomtown born from a geological misunderstanding. In 1883, boundary rider Charles Raspe staked a mineral claim on a jagged outcrop known as the Broken Hill, mistaking the heavy black ore for tin. Laboratory assay tests conducted in Adelaide soon revealed the outcrop was actually part of the world's largest known silver-lead-zinc deposit, a boomerang-shaped ore body 300 metres wide, 7 kilometres long, and extending over a kilometre deep into Proterozoic metamorphic rocks. Over the past 140 years, more than 200 million tonnes of ore have been extracted, producing billions of dollars in metal wealth and founding the multinational mining giant BHP. But the century of heavy industrial smelting left a severe environmental footprint. Fine lead dust blew directly over the residential streets of South Broken Hill, contaminating topsoil and rainwater tanks. Environmental health monitoring conducted by New South Wales Health revealed elevated blood lead levels in local children, triggering a multi-million-dollar remediation program involving soil capping, home decontamination, and strict dust suppression protocols. Today, the central line of load is a heavily restricted industrial and historical historical precinct managed by mining leaseholders and the local council. Automated air monitoring stations log lead particulate levels continuously across the town, proving that while the high-grade ore drove national industrialization, its toxic residue remains permanently bonded to the red dust of the far west. Number 6. The Nullarbor Karst Plain and Underground Cave Systems, Western Australia and South Australia. Stretching across 200,000 square kilometres along the Great Australian Bight sits the Nullarbor Plain, the largest continuous exposure of limestone rock on Earth. Formed as a shallow marine seabed 25 million years ago, the limestone platform was uplifted and exposed to chemical weathering, creating a vast karst landscape completely devoid of surface trees. Colonial explorers mapped the surface as an arid, featureless wasteland. Yet beneath the dry plain lies a subterranean labyrinth containing hundreds of kilometres of surveyed passages, massive water-filled caverns, and deep sinkholes known locally as blowholes. Systems like Cocklebiddy Cave and Conolder Cave extend hundreds of metres underground into crystal-clear groundwater aquifers. Conolder Cave holds international archaeological significance. Structural mapping and carbon dating conducted by IATSIS and university researchers confirmed First Nations finger markings on the deep limestone walls dating back more than 30,000 years, proving ancient mining of flint in total darkness. Today, the cave network falls under a patchwork of protected reserves managed by Parks Australia, South Australia National Parks and Wildlife Service, and Western Australian Department of Biodiversity, Conservation and Attractions. Access to the deep cave systems is strictly controlled, requiring scientific research permits and advanced cave diving credentials. The surface remains completely barren, but beneath the desert floor lies one of the largest freshwater aquifers on the continent, guarded by sheer limestone drop-offs that can collapse without warning. Number 5. The Yarrabubba Aquifer Restricted Extraction Reserves, Western Australia. Stretching beneath the Swan Coastal Plain and extending deep into the Perth Basin lies the Yarrabubba Aquifer, a massive subterranean freshwater reserve containing an estimated 1,000 cubic kilometres of high-quality water trapped within Jurassic sandstones up to 2 kilometres deep. For over a century, urban expansion across Perth relied primarily on surface reservoirs and shallow coastal aquifers. However, as southwest Western Australia experienced a persistent 40% decline in autumn and winter rainfall since the mid-1970s due to long-term climate shifts, the Water Corporation turned to the deep Yarrabubba to secure the city's drinking supply. Hydrogeological modelling and deep monitoring wells installed by the Department of Water and Environmental Regulation revealed that while the aquifer holds enormous reserves, unconstrained extraction risks drawing down water tables, drying out ecologically sensitive wetlands, and causing saltwater intrusion along the Geograph Bay coastline. To prevent ecological collapse, state authorities established strict extraction caps and designated protected recharge zones across the Blackwood River catchment. Extraction bore fields are heavily secured infrastructure assets protected under state security legislation. The deep water, sitting 2,000 metres beneath Perth's southern suburbs, now supplies over 20% of the metropolitan water scheme, proving that an invisible geological reservoir formed 160 million years ago has become the critical buffer keeping a capital city viable in a drying climate. But what happens when the hidden boundary is not a water table deep underground, but a living organism built over thousands of years on an open coastline? Number 4. K'gari Moving Sandmass, Queensland. Off the Fraser Coast of Queensland, 1,500 square kilometres of dense rainforest, perched freshwater lakes, and massive parabolic dunes rise out of the Coral Sea. K'gari is the largest sand island in the world, stretching 123 kilometres in length. For thousands of years, the Butchulla people lived on the island, calling it K'gari. Colonial maps recorded it as Fraser Island, treating it as a static landform suitable for timber harvesting of Saturnae and tallow wood. Geological research conducted by the University of Queensland and CSIRO revealed that the island is not stationary. It is a massive, shifting deposit of silica sand, migrating northward at a rate of up to several metres per year under the influence of longshore drift currents that have carried sediment from the Great Dividing Range for over 700,000 years. Heavy mineral sands mining operations in the mid-20th century stripped coastal dunes before public opposition halted extraction. In 2023, the Queensland government officially restored the traditional name K'gari across state maps and signposts. Today, Queensland Parks and Wildlife Service enforces strict access controls. All vehicles require permits, camping is restricted to fenced precincts to manage dingo interactions, and driving on the fragile dune systems carries heavy fines under the Nature Conservation Act 1992. The entire island sits on a shifting seabed, proving that even a massive landform covered in old-growth rainforest is fundamentally an unanchored mountain of moving sand. Number 3. The Hamersley Range Banded Iron Formations, Western Australia. In the Pilbara region, 1,200 kilometres north of Perth, lies a mountain range that holds the geological bedrock of Australia's mineral export economy. The Hamersley Range consists of massive, iron-rich strata that extend over tens of thousands of square kilometres. In 1952, prospector Lang Hancock flew through a gorge during a low-altitude flight to avoid bad weather and noticed rust-red cliffs rising hundreds of metres on either side. Subsequent geological surveys by the Western Australian Department of Mines confirmed that these cliffs belong to 2.5 billion-year-old Archean and Paleoproterozoic banded iron formations. These layers were deposited long before oxygen filled the atmosphere, when primitive photosynthetic microorganisms oxidized dissolved iron in ancient oceans, causing billions of tons of iron oxide to settle onto the primordial seafloor. Today, the region accounts for over 30% of the world's iron ore supply, with massive open-cut mines operating at Mount Whaleback and Tom Price. The mining complexes are strictly controlled industrial security zones, monitored by automated haulage systems, heavy rail corridors, and private security forces under state agreement acts. Geoscience Australia estimates that hundreds of billions of tons of iron ore remain in the ground. Yet the extraction process continues to reshape the topography of country, permanently altering landscapes held sacred by traditional owners like the Banjima, Yinhawangka, and Guruma peoples for tens of thousands of years. Number 2. Shark Bay Stromatolites of Hamlin Pool, Western Australia. 800 kilometres north of Perth, in a shallow, hypersaline embayment at the edge of the Indian Ocean, sits Hamlin Pool. To early European navigators, the sheltered inlet appeared as a barren, muddy tidal flat. It was not until 1956 that marine geologists identified the dark, dome-shaped rocks standing in the shallow water as living stromatolites, microbial reefs built by cyanobacteria over thousands of years. The water in Hamlin Pool is twice as salty as ordinary seawater due to a shallow sandbar blocking oceanic circulation, creating an environment too extreme for marine predators like snails to survive and feed on the bacterial mats. These living structures are identical to 3.5 billion-year-old fossilized stromatolites found in the Pilbara, representing the oldest continuous record of living organisms anywhere on Earth. Under the Environment Protection and Biodiversity Conservation Act 1999 and Western Australian conservation laws, Hamlin Pool is managed as a strictly protected marine reserve within the Shark Bay World Heritage Area. Public access is limited to a single elevated boardwalk. Swimming, touching, or walking on the fragile structures is strictly illegal to prevent crushing the delicate calcium carbonate layers. The site provides a direct link to the Precambrian atmosphere, showing that the foundational biological engine of the planet remains active in a remote corner of the Western Australian coast. Number 1. The stromatolite fossils of North Pole, Pilbara, Western Australia. 150 kilometres inland from Port Hedland, in a remote stretch of spinifex country known locally as North Pole, sits a low ridge of chert and barite rock. In 1980, geologists analysing samples from the Dresser Formation identified microscopic structural layering preserved inside 3.5 billion-year-old hydrothermal silica deposits. Laboratory testing using high-resolution electron microscopes and carbon isotope analysis at the University of New South Wales confirmed these structures as fossilised stromatolites, created by living bacterial colonies when the Earth was less than 1 billion years old. The North Pole site represents the oldest universally accepted evidence of life on Earth. There are no visitors centres, paved roads, or warning signs. The site sits on remote pastoral leases and mineral tenements, protected primarily by its extreme isolation and strict heritage protection legislation administered by the Western Australian Government. Geoscience Australia and international research institutions maintain precise monitoring of sample collection to prevent depletion of the outcrop. The rocks at North Pole prove that life on this planet did not begin in a quiet tide pool, but emerged inside superheated, mineral-rich hydrothermal vents on an ancient ocean floor billions of years ago. What kept these hidden features unnoticed for so long was never their physical absence, but the assumption that the colonial survey line and the published topographic map sheet represented a complete inventory of country. Geoscience Australia, the CSIRO, and university research teams continue to map the continent using satellite radar, seismic tomography, and airborne geophysics, yet vast areas of the deep crust and the offshore maritime shelf remain completely uncharacterized. Subterranean aquifers, buried impact structures, and submerged ancient shorelines are still being identified every year as analytical techniques improve. The national map looks finished, printed, and bound, but the ground beneath it remains an active, unread archive of deep time and unresolved history. Which place in your own state or territory has always struck you as geologically odd, or which item on this list surprised you most? Share your thoughts in the comments below and consider subscribing to follow our ongoing spatial investigations across the continent.